Hello, Podwalkers, and welcome to another episode of Goblin Lore. I'm your host, Joe Redeman. You can find me on Twitter at Fyndhorn. That's F-Y-N-D Horn. And today, I am not alone. I am joined by my lovely co-host, who will introduce himself in a moment. But first, we have a question of the day, as always, a burning inquiry, if you will. And that would be, of your own personal color pie identity, what is an element typically associated with one of those colors or the whole identity that doesn't fit who you are? So I'm going to throw it over to you, Alex.
Yeah, so I'm Alex, found on Twitter at AlexanderNewM. And like I normally tend to do, I'm going to take this question and answer it a little bit from an angle. So generally, I kind of look at myself in kind of a white blue red a little bit color pie. Like I have a very structured, organized part of my personality that's a very white/white blue. To be honest, I think it's more white, and a much more spontaneous, creative side that's more red. But in the red-white combo, most people would say, "Oh, that's Boros" as a shorthand. Except there's not a lot in the Boros guild that I think I really identify with, which is part of why I tend to say, maybe I'm more Jeskai. To be honest, I really think I am a little more closely white-red, but the Boros incarnation of that color combination doesn't really fit me, which is totally fine. Like we try to talk a lot, color pie philosophy in general, there's a wide range. And any given person, even if they are mostly in one color, are going to have aspects of others too. People are, a spectrum in lots of regards. And that's why, as much as I love Ravnica, and obviously the Magic community loves Ravnica, I'm really hoping we find another place where Wizards can try to represent these two color pairs in different ways. I think they did a little bit of that with Dragons of Tarkir, but Dragons of Tarkir was a weird follow-up with, the wedges going into the two color pairs, and those were just the allies. So that's where I'm at there.
No, totally. I completely agree with you. And actually, that is exactly my thinking on it as well. I tend to identify myself as main red, and then sort of secondarily either blue or green, depending on the day. I would say usually blue, because I tend to find myself pursuing a lot of creative and I guess sort of intellectual pursuits more so than physical or athletic pursuits in my day-to-day. I would say green would at least be my tertiary color. But again, I have to exactly echo what you say. I don't think of myself as is it in the sense of like being frenetically mad scientist-y. I think of myself as extremely passionate and hot-tempered, yes, and defensive, I guess, of people that I care deeply about, and I care deeply about people when I care about them. So that very much is red to me. But when you bring in the blue element, I think a lot of that does become something that I don't see in myself, where I do use my mind to pursue a lot of sort of investigations and inquiries. I ask a lot of questions of my daily life, but I guess some of the philosophical foundations of like blue believes that everybody can be changed. Everyone's a clean slate, everyone's a blank slate, and you can always adapt and change things. And also the lack of ethics in blue, I think, is a huge concern that doesn't fit with me. So again, I'm kind of echoing what you're saying, but I think a lot of sort of the surrounding elements of blue don't align with me, even though I would say primarily I'm a red blue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I realized too, I didn't go into a lot of details there, so maybe I'll kind of go through some of my reasoning for my color identity and things. And so in white in particular, like a lot of the community aspects of white resonate a lot with me. A lot of the being a community and working together and being cooperative, I found, especially the more I sort of become critical of some of the media and really examine what I enjoy about the things that I enjoy, that has helped me to find things that I enjoy more. But also I found that a lot of the things that I'm enjoying more are those more cooperative things. It's less the hero's journey where the hero becomes powerful, goes off, saves the day, and comes back. It's more, I guess I've heard the heroine's journey tends to be more, she gains allies, or they, because it's a little more, it's gender neutral, even though it's heroines, where they kind of gain,
which is better
allies
than the heroine journey.
Yeah, than the heroine journey where you're not gaining much. Anyway, but that's a little more of a story arc, and it's one that I'm not super familiar with the beats of. But from what I understand, it's one where it's more about gaining allies and cooperatively working towards an end. And there's some power gain sometimes, but in any event, so that aspect of white is definitely something that fits with me, that I identify with. Also, just some of the order, like white. We see white blue as Azorius and Ravnica be the Guild of Order, but white in general kind of has that. You look, Selesnya has the nature in order. You have Orzhov, or order to the extortion of everyone around them. I think a lot of that order comes in through white, and that's where I have these two aspects of my personality. When I try to say, to write stuff for the podcast, or I do my own writing and creative pursuits, there's a lot of red there. I'm a discovery writer. There's a lot of spontaneity. I need some freedom and opening, but with too much, I accomplish nothing. I spin my wheels, or I come up with a bunch of things and don't move in any given direction, or I just do nothing. Sometimes those restrictions are necessary. And so for me, every creative pursuit is the tension between how much of these two sides, how much structure and order do I have to give myself to be creative, and how much breathing room do I have to give the creativity to allow it to move. And
I feel you talking about red being creative, but creative and spontaneous, but can be like sort of that flame, that like explosion rather than a burning flame. I feel both attacked and seen, and I don't like this. I don't like this moment anymore.
Yes, and I think some of the other aspects of red too. I think I don't know. I go to some of the now I'm totally blanking on the card with Chandra and her mom. One of the first.
Oh yes, Cathartic Reunion.
Thank you. Cathartic Reunion, one of the first good representations of non-violent emotion in red in Magic. And there's some of those, like, it's not like all the colors have emotions, but they have different reactions to them. And red, it's like, just go deep, just push in on that emotion. And I feel that. Yeah.
Yeah. Red is feel everything and feel it hard.
Yeah.
All up in the feels is red. Actually, that might be a fun little graphic to put out from the cast account at some point. How each color, like, how the millennials would describe each color as identity.
Or I like the idea, just the color pie of how each color feels about feelings. like in blue, it's about controlling and regulating and making sure that they're not getting in the way of things.
Blue, especially in the Midwest of America, would be just push it all down and deal with it and no, maybe that's white, is like, nope, push it all down for the greater good, shut up so that nobody else knows that you are feeling this way. Blue would be like, okay, let's break this down and analyze every part of it, and that way we'll defeat it.
Which, to be honest, is one of the only pieces of blue that I actually identify with. Because going through, your therapy and going through all the stuff I've done with my social anxiety, one of the ways that I kind of worked through all that was to get very blue and very methodical. And every time I had a reaction that I didn't consciously choose, to take a step back and say, why did I feel this way? Why did I react this way? Where did this come from? And start to trace it down.
Well, and see, that's kind of the lovely thing about being human when it regards this is the color pie is archetypal, you know. It does not describe each of us individually. We all, like you said at the top, we all have elements of everything. I've talked about this ad nauseum with my wife, who actually does not do magic at all. It's not that she doesn't like it. She just, that's not her cup of tea.
Yeah.
But she likes the idea, the philosophy behind the color pie. And we've discussed like what the color identities of each of our friends are and family members and that sort of thing. And she's like, honestly, it's weird. Because she's like, I'm not saying you're a bad person or evil or something, which I'm like, okay, where's this going? But she's like, but I do see, at least when we started dating, there's a fair amount of black in your color identity. And I think it was genuinely because as a former performing artist, you have to have a fair amount of narcissism and self-confidence. And as an extrovert also, that was on full display for me. So we all have those little elements, and we all, the things that get out of control when those balances, swing out from where they should be for us, then we need to supplement with some extra outside. So for you, you're like, oh, my blue's a little low in my color pie. I need to pop a little more in there. For me, I needed to pop a little bit of everything else in to offset my black,
Yeah, no, and that's really okay. This is really interesting. I think we've just kind of trained ourselves into another episode here because. So it's funny you mentioned that, because talking about black, like one of the elements of black that I very specifically have been, I don't know, emulating or whatever is the right term, but one of their elements is, I'm trying to remember the exact phrase, but it's something along the lines of each individual is the person who is in the position best to know how to help themselves. Where white will say, we think we can build a society that will help and benefit everyone and force everybody to sort of follow this path, especially if you go too white. Black is the opposite, where it's like give everybody the ability to just do whatever they want, and they will make sure that they are taken care of in the best way because they are the best person to do that. And in the extreme, you have, also bad situations. But I think that piece of black philosophy is really interesting, and that's a thing that I've kind of been looking at for myself too, is that that especially partnered with blue, the color of self-change, the color of if you have, just do it, if you just self-improvement, I suppose. Nike,
you're saying Nike is fairly blue, just do it.
Yeah, just do it. Yeah. And as you said earlier, blue by itself doesn't have a whole lot of morals about some of the things that it does, but there is, I think, a very good element of and a very good message of self-improvement, and especially partnered with black of pursuing what you need to be happy, pursuing what you need to be you. Especially with the white element in me and in a society in general, of course, without hurting other people and trying not to impact other people. But I think there is something to be said for a little bit of narcissism, a little bit of selfishness for yourself to give yourself what you need.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that's, I think that's something that we see in a lot of people who are caring and kind is there's not enough black in their color pie. There's not enough of that self-preservation. And, that's a big misnomer when people read the color pie is they see that there's a lot of, black villains, there's a lot of antagonists who are in that color, and they go, oh, okay, that means evil. No. It's not that way at all. And really it is that we've talked about that ad nauseum previously, is it's just about looking out for yourself. It's about, you have the best idea, the best way to do, to know, you have the closest understanding of what you need to be successful. It's kind of the way that my job works, where there is a big structural organization of order above us and around us and supporting us. But when it comes to the mail carriers out on the street doing things, we have a certain amount of latitude to do them the way that we need to be as successful and as efficient as possible. And that can be immoral. It's amoral is the big distinction that Mark Rosewater makes, is it's amoral, not immoral. But if it is tempered with the balance of other colors, then that amorality isn't problematic. It just is.
So that's interesting. I know we talked about, color pie of our jobs and things, and earlier I talked about how I'm in the finance department of a financial company, making me the Orzoviest of Orzov jobs. But the way you're describing it, do you think the post office might be in that identity, or maybe more Esper? Because it sounds like you have some structure and order, but you also have, in a very different way, you have the white-black representation potentially.
Yeah, I do think so. I think a lot of corporations, and the post office does technically fall into the category of a corporation, even though it is a governmental it is associated strongly with the government and has been at points part of the government. It is its own entity now, and so it does have certain profit margins that it wants to make and needs to make and all this sort of stuff. So it is a corporation, and so there is a strong, with any capitalist system, with any capitalist organization, there's a black and a white element for sure. Mm-hmm. I would say that its structure, when it comes to, if we want to just paint it in very broad brushes, the structure of the post office is very rigid. It is extremely white. Mm. The purpose is, I think, demure in the sense of there are profit margins to meet, like I said, but they are in the business of information gathering and dispersal, and so that brings in the blue element. My specific job, I think, is very blue, but it does have an element of black with it because there is that sort of latitude to if there's for instance, for self-preservation's sake, if there's a dog in a person's front yard that is barking and it is in between me and the mailbox, I don't deliver that mail. I bundle it up, write dog out on it, and we try to redeliver the next day, but we don't put ourselves in harm's way for the sake of that purpose.
Mm-hmm. You're kind of given the latitude to make that choice yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can see that being black, and I think in a overarching philosophical sense, the U.S., I suppose any postal system has a little bit of a white sort of community focus to it too. It's part of the infrastructure of a quote unquote modernized, industrialized society. And in that sense, I see a little bit of white, maybe a little bit of blue as well. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes sense. Yeah, I think it's interesting to, it's not a organization that I think actually aligns with my color pie very well, which is surprising. Mm-hmm. But that's another thing too, where we look for things depending on who you are. Sometimes you look for things that complement your color identity. Sometimes you look for things that supplement it. Mm-hmm. Or maybe that's not the way to say it. That fit versus complement.
Yeah, that totally fits. It doesn't necessarily have to echo it, as long as it is a fit for you. Sometimes something that's different fits well. I just got back from a wedding with a friend of mine, and they're a couple they've been dating for years, but they're very different people. Mm-hmm. And that's a thing that I think early on some people in their lives are like, they didn't get it. But then spend some time together and realize that despite the fact that these two are very different, they're very different in a way that complements each other. And that is great. And I think that there's a lot of cases like that with you, your job. And there's things where just because you fit a certain color identity, doesn't mean that you need everything in your life to fit that color identity. For some people, that might work. For others, it's not going to work.
Right.
And that's why, while we build this categorization and things, we have the color pie, we have personality traits, and there's all these different ways to sort of build, to quantify or to build a vocabulary around who we are as individuals. Ultimately, what works best for you is what works best for you. One of my favorite nonsensical sayings that makes a lot of sense is nothing succeeds like success.
Right.
It's a statement that on its face says nothing, but when you really think about it, it's like, well, yeah, you can say on paper this thing doesn't work, but if in real life it actually works, well, then it works. You don't. It's fine. You don't necessarily need it to be able to draw a diagram to show why it works, as long as it works. And I think there's a case like that. A lot of times we will take, and those personality tests and the color pies and the things like that can be very helpful to give people a framework to understand themselves and a vocabulary to describe themselves to others.
Right.
But those very frameworks and vocabularies can become restrictive when we decide, I'm an introvert, so I must do X, as opposed to, I'm an introvert, but I like to do this, or I'm going to do, I'm an introvert, and that helps me to understand why I want to do X or Y. But I want to do Z right now, which doesn't seem to fit, but that's okay because that's what I want to do. And ultimately, that's how I ended up figuring out that I'm an outgoing introvert. I like to have conversations. I love to talk. This is a big deal, but I need to recharge a lot sometimes. And it's fine. But had I stuck rigidly to the definition of introvert, I wouldn't have given myself the opportunity to be outgoing. And I'd be missing that part of myself.
It's funny you say that. I was listening to a podcast today when we're recording this, where somebody was talking about how charismatic people have influenced a lot of society just with their own ideals. So, a lot of society is somewhat kind of the story of individuals because of charismatic people guiding based on their ideas. And somebody, and one of the people talking about that said, and frankly, I think that is kind of a little bit of a superpower. It's not something that we should necessarily think is bad. It's just, we need to be responsible with it. And so extroverts, right. And so people need to stop, if they're not actually introverts, stop describing yourself as an introvert. Yes, we all like to recharge. We all like to be alone. If you didn't, you'd be a sociopath. So extroverts stand up. We get stuff done. Introverts do too. But I'm an extrovert and I'm proud of it. And so, I thought about that today and I was like, yeah, you know what? I am very much an extrovert. I'm okay with saying that in my head. But I just tend to not like people a lot of the time. There are very few people I like being around. And so that's why, that's where mine is. There are very few people I like being extroverted towards, but I spend that energy really aggressively for those people.
And it's funny because one of the first places where I really kind of realized that, and this, by the way, is a very weird way to sort of sidestep into, this is why representation matters. But I went to a local convention, and the very first panel of the 4-day con was how to do convergence as an introvert. And up on the panel, we had 2 introverts and a shy extrovert who said that. It's like, well, I'm, you're extrovert for the panel, but I'm actually a shy extrovert. And she talked about kind of what that meant to her and how she, has some differences in kind of how she operates and things like that. And that's when I'm like, you know what? Maybe that is why there's this element of myself where I know for a fact that I get peopled out. I just run out of people. I can't deal with people anymore. I have to go sit in my room and play World of Warcraft for 3 days.
Yeah.
And to recharge. But at the same time, I love having conversations. I go to the GP and I spend all day trying to talk to people. I barely even want to play Magic. Sometimes, Magic can be great, but sometimes it gets in the way of me just sitting there and having a chat with somebody. And that that panel in particular, that individual talking about her experiences there, really helped me kind of work through and figure myself out.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's an awesome thing. And yeah, it's, again, we talk about people being spectrums. You know, these descriptors are handy. They're quick. They're nice shorthand. They really help for like mixer events at parties or, you know, team things at work.
Yeah, little plaques at work, because that's my team at the department that I joined. I think a little bit before I joined, they had some communication issues with each other. People getting frustrated at each other for things that didn't really matter, but it's because they were kind of didn't understand the other people as much. So they did Myers-Briggs right before I came in, and then they went through, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he wrote a book, The 5 Love Languages.
Yes, I was just going to say that is big.
Then he co-wrote The 5 Languages of Workplace Appreciation, which is the book that we got. So they bought a copy of that book for everybody. We all read it. We took the test to figure out what our language of workplace appreciation was. And like then someone made like little plaques that had our name with both our Myers-Briggs and our, you know, number 1 and number 2 appreciation languages, whatever they call it. So, and again, that can be helpful. As you're saying, it's the problem becomes when we're using them as prescriptive as opposed to descriptive. I think I've heard that somewhere. I don't know, but I think I'm using that properly. If you decide that because you have this label, you must do X, Y, that's prescriptive, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
But using it as descriptive to say, hey, this is where I'm at, and maybe you're not. Maybe you eventually learn that that's something else. That's totally fine too. Like, right. That's okay. People change. B, people are complex as hell. Even yourself have a lot more going on, and your actions and reactions to things, there's stuff you don't understand in there, and I guarantee it. That's just how human psychology works. And so
that's how being human works.
Yeah, it's how being human works, and being alive works, because there's just so much stimuli that happens that you don't remember all of it, and you can't trace it all back.
Right.
And so over time, you're going to find that certain things don't fit you anymore, either because you've changed or because you understand stuff about yourself that you didn't before, and that's totally fine too. And I think that's why those labels can be so helpful, because they give you a starting place and they give you handholds and something to kind of work with. When you have blocks you can move around, you can start to build a better picture than when you're trying to work it out of whole cloth and you have no language to talk to other people about their own experiences.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly the thing. It's that communicative shorthand. Mm-hmm. And you know, this is I noticed before that we had a really nice moment to segue into our real world connection, and I decided to sort of juke out of the way, double back to tell an anecdote, and then we got back there again. So this is maybe like the other signature Goblin Lore transition, where, you know, we still circle back to the thing after we do another loop-the-loop. But I just want to say that this is actually a perfect transition to our real world connection of categorization, which is just sort of the psychological process of grouping things, of putting things and people and events and memories and senses, all that sort of stuff. How you take information and make sense of it, make meaning of it, is through categorization. It's by grouping like things. And so, just to give a very brief history of this, because it's a deep topic, we'll link to the Wikipedia article in the show notes, and that even doesn't go into nearly as much as the research on this. But this all kind of started with Aristotle and Plato and all those early Greek thinkers, the classic Greek thinkers, who introduced the idea of grouping objects based on similar properties. So, how many feet does a thing have? In this category, we would say then that, like, humans and ostriches would be in the same category. So, that's one way of looking at it. Does it have fur or feathers? Okay, well, now we're getting some distinction. Now we're saying, okay, humans, ostriches, and kangaroos might be in the same category, but now they all three are separate because they all, humans don't have fur, kangaroos do, birds have feathers. Okay. Can it fly? Even more so now we're getting some distinction. Well, I guess ostriches can't fly. Never mind. But you know what I mean? It's this sort of like very basic putting two boxes out and saying, here's group A, here's group B, separating what you have in there. Then you go within the box and you've got a divider and you go, okay, here's subgroup A and subgroup B. And you go in there and you get down to the very minute sort of details, but through sort of, I guess it's mostly just comparative.
Yeah, I mean, in a general sense, I mean, science people would know more specifics much better than I do. But this is how, at least in Western science, this is how we separate species and animals. You have the family, you have the genus, you have the species. I don't know what order those are all in. You have bigger and categories at the top that go into smaller and smaller categories as you go down and divide it sort of genetically and feature-wise, and you have your amphibians and you divide them down, and you have your I almost said humanoids, but that's playing too much.
That's a D&D and WoW.
But you kind of have the different groupings that then go down and down and down, and then you find a platypus, and then every scientist collectively throws their hands in the air for a little while because categories are great. I'm sure they fit it in there somewhere. I know. But still, categorization is super helpful. One thing that we need to keep in mind with it is you should be flexible because things change / didn't change, but you didn't have all the information when you built your categories to begin with.
Yep, absolutely. No, and so then we go from classical to conceptual clustering, which sort of goes the other way. It's instead of sort of comparing this thing to other things and then making a definition for it, you define the ideas about this thing. So for this can of bubbly water in front of me, I would say, okay, it is a canned beverage that has carbonation in it, and it tastes like citrus, and there's no calories, and it's non-alcoholic, and it's enclosed in metal, all this sort of stuff. You would generate the description and then classify based on those descriptions. So you're kind of going the opposite direction. This started mostly in the 80s for like machine learning, early machine learning. And then
I don't know if this is just a complete distraction, but I think it's funny that all of those categories or all of those concepts that you did for the bubbly water to categorize it also applies to this polar seltzer that's sitting next to me.
See, there you go.
Which means that perhaps we can, conceptually cluster Goblin Lore podcasters, and drinking seltzer.
Goblin Lore podcast brought to you by seltzer water.
So we have 100% of our co-hosts right now drinking.
And I would say that we all for sure know that what is it? Correlation is causation.
Oh, definitely, 100%. Exactly. That's and 2 is a sufficient sample size to determine qualitative statements. Yeah.
And quantitative.
And quantitative as well. Yeah,
and
we'll make all of them. All the tivs. Every one of those can be made with a sample size of at least 2.
Add us with your tivs on Twitter at Goblin Lore Pod, #mytivis.
Yeah, what is your favorite tiv?
Speaking of other tivs, we're going to get to the last cognitive approach of categorization, and that's prototype theory. Very roughly, this is an idea proposed in the 70s that it can also be viewed as a process of grouping things based on prototypes. So kind of taking the ideal or the average of these things and saying, hey, this is this thing. So you'd say like all cups, would be things that hold water. These cups are going to go here. And all these bowls, which are shorter, wider things that hold things, will go over here. This sort of very rough idea of like you come up with an ideological average and then differentiate based on that. And social scientists, I greatly apologize if I am horribly mischaracterizing these categorization models. Please let us know, because we do try to be accurate. But these are the three main ideas of categorization. And I think that to an extent we do all of these in our day-to-day lives, and we do a mix of them. You know, if we were to say like every sort of, if we were to do the prototype theory and say like every thing that holds water is a cup, well then all of your bowls and cups get mixed up. What we then have to do is separate them a little bit by saying, okay, well, this one's a tall one. This one is a short, wide one. Okay, this is going to be a cup and that's going to be a bowl. You know, that sort of separation. And again, maybe I might be misunderstanding this a little bit, but I think there is sort of there are truths to each of these, and they all describe how we process, again, shorthanding the world and acquiring and parsing out the knowledge and information that we receive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think just a good high-level description of just categorization as a whole, right, is right here, like the last sentence on the first section on the Wikipedia page. It says, categorization is important in learning, prediction, inference, decision-making, language, and many forms of organisms' interactions with their environments. It's about how do you process what's around you? How do you learn what's around you? And it's a thing that organisms do automatically. I mean, humans do it. We talked about different ways that humans do it and have created systems around it. But, you know, even an animal will say, this thing is dangerous, this thing is edible, this thing is safe, you know, and build categories based on what it needs and how it interacts with its environment. I think a good just kind of overarching high-level sentence to talk about what categorization is and where it's used is right here on this Wikipedia article. Mm-hmm. It says, categorization is important in learning, prediction, inference, decision-making, language, and many forms of organisms' interaction with their environments. And so it's a thing that humans do. We've talked about systems that humans do to create it, but also just animals. Like, that is categorization. You can have an animal says this is safe, this is food, this is dangerous, and depending on how they interact with their environment, they'll build these categories automatically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we've talked a little bit about that with like you know, sort of evolutionary response and mm-hmm. you know, that sort of thing in the past. But it's a very similar thing to where we go, okay, this thing hurt me. What are the qualities of this thing that I should look out for in the future? You know, if you pricked yourself on a needle, maybe you go, okay, maybe it's silver things, you know, and your brain does this all unconsciously, obviously, but you know, maybe it's silver things that are dangerous. Okay, well, you try that out and, oh no, it turns out this silver thing is really nice. It's a spoon. It helps me eat. Okay, let's go back to this. Maybe it's pointy things. You try that out. Yep, sure enough, that it's pointy things. Like, you know, and again, I think a couple episodes back, we talked about how this sort of pattern matching and categorization can lead to, you know, miscategorizations and sort of misassociations. But on the whole, it's what's kept us alive for, you know, however long we've been around.
Oh, it's a survival mechanism. But the thing is, another a good example of automatic subconscious categorization, anxiety disorders. This happens a lot. I can say with someone with social anxiety, the fight flight, you know, section of the brain decides that certain situations, like being embarrassed in public or being the focus of attention, certain situations are dangerous. And because that section of the brain is supposed to keep you alive, it will trigger in highly inappropriate in society settings because it doesn't understand how society works. It knows this thing feels dangerous, so kick in the runaway or the fight instinct right now despite the fact that all that's happening is I just got called on to speak in front of class or something like that. And that is, not a categorization, not something that I did consciously, but that was my brain taking those building blocks and saying, okay, this is necessary for survival. We need to kick in this instinct because, the whole fight or flight thing. And here's some physiology for people who aren't aware with, at least like an anxiety disorder, when your fight or flight response, when that's engaged, and I'm sure there's more scientific terms for this, but when that's engaged, the body physically responds. It's not just a mental thing. Your body physically pulls blood away from your brain, and it's sending blood to your extremities because that's how you fight or you fly. It sends more blood to your arms and your legs. Right. But that means you're in a situation where you're already a little bit panicky because you're nervous or you're whatever, but now the blood is flowing away from your brain. That gives you even less conscious control of your reactions.
Right. And so this is stuff that, yes, again, if you, when you're in those react moments, when you're in reaction mode, these things are happening subconsciously. I guess what I would say, and this might be where we sort of give our takeaways here a little bit, is, to be able to, hopefully what you can do is pull yourself back to the conscious brain, to that blue part of your color pie, and say, okay, let me identify the things that I'm feeling. Exactly what you were saying you did with, with the help of the therapy that you went through. Let me identify what I'm feeling, analyze those elements, categorize, and then sort of categorize whether or not this is actually a dangerous situation that I should be concerned and anxious about, or whether it's something that I shouldn't be. And then there's also the sort of discussion too of, well, okay, I shouldn't be, but my body is still having this physiological reaction to this, circumstance. Can I work through this situation? And so, you do have that next level process as well, but that's sort of outside of what we're talking about at the moment. What we're saying is go through that logical process of, I guess this would be sort of the conceptual clustering thing, is create a definition of the moment you're in, and then categorize it from there. Say, okay, now that I've written this description in my head, is this something that is tolerable?
Well, and it's a weird, maybe way to say that, but a way to get out of those situations or to work through some of those situations is beforehand have plans, have ways to extricate yourself, because in those situations where you're less able to do, your cognitive function is a little bit impaired because your body's physically pulling blood away from your brain, or whatever the situation is, if you have a plan and you already have a, excuse me, I'm going to need to go away, I need to go do this, you have ways to remove yourself from the situation, that can diffuse everything. And if you have stuff figured out beforehand, and it's not always going to happen, there's going to be situations that come up, but if you find ways to kind of, I think of it as kind of building yourself tools that you get familiar with. I know, okay, this is a really large tangent, but that's what this whole episode has been. I know nothing, absolutely nothing about actual martial arts. I've never studied that before, but I've heard from, good Lord, I can't tell you where, but I could tell you, that's a distraction. Humans store information in a different place from where they heard the information, because information is necessary for survival. Where you heard it isn't, and that means a lot of times you lose the second where you keep the first, which is also why misinformation is easy to spread somewhere. So I may be very wrong about this, but my understanding is that you go through katas, you go through all of the motions over and over again, because if you ever are in a situation where you need to fight, you can't sit and work through and think about all the things. You need to be able to just react, to go through the motions you've already done. And because you've done them so many times, you can just do it. To take that in a very different place, a similar thing is in situations where I know I might get, some anxiety reactions. I find ways, especially on the smaller reactions, I find ways to step back and work through processes. If it starts to get higher, start to identify, okay, this is a situation where I can't just stop and work through this. Is there a way I can exit this situation? How can I tactfully pull out? How can I I need to go here. Sometimes it's just I need to use the bathroom. Just get yourself removed from the physical space. And sometimes you might need to become not tactful at a certain point. But having some of those plans in place beforehand, helps you be ready to do it if you need them. And also that has helped me not get as anxious, because then I don't panic because I have a plan and I know I can fall back to something.
Right. Yeah, no, totally. And that's, what's that?
Did I lose the point in there somewhere? Because I feel like I might have taken one tangent too many.
Don't we always? No, that's great. And I think that's exactly it. That it's sort of the categorization before the act, before the moment there. So yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's you're planning, you're setting things up for success. You're deciding what will be a successful experience for you, and then once you have that planned and visualized prior, then you can lead towards that. And I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And mind you, this is a highly white-blue approach that is being recommended to you all from a pair of very red people. So you should be very grateful for that.
Well, and to take, I suppose, another, a half step to give a little bit slightly different, but definitely related closing advice from myself. Your categorization is going to happen. It's always going to happen. It's going to happen automatically. It's not bad. It can be bad, but that doesn't mean that it is. It can be good. But be mindful about the situations you're in. Be mindful about how you've categorized things and people sometimes. I guess I didn't start this sentence going in this direction, but I'm going this direction now. Be ready to change your categorization. Be ready to apologize and take a step back because you miscategorized somebody or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we got it. I think we nailed it.
Yeah, and we totally didn't talk about what we actually were going to talk about, which means bonus episode that we can record at a later date.
Wait, we didn't get to Homerids at all. Oh, crap.
No, we didn't talk about Homerids. We didn't talk about Greek pantheons.
Nice. That's our show. You can find the podcast at Goblin Lore Pod on Twitter, or email any questions, comments, or concerns to goblinlorepodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to support your friendly neighborhood gobslugs, you can do so at patreon.com/goblinlorepod. This episode of Goblin Lore was hosted by Alex Newman, who you can find on Twitter at AlexanderNewM. Engineering, editing, and production for this episode by Joe Redeman, who you can find on Twitter at Findhorn. That's Fynd Horn. Our music is by Wintergott, who you can find at wintergotten.com. That's wintergatan.com. Logo by Stephen Raphael on Twitter at Stephen Raffle. Goblin Lore is a presentation of Hipsters of the Coast, which you can find at hipstersofthecoast.com or at hipstersmtg on Twitter. Thank you all for listening, and remember, goblins, like snowflakes, are only dangerous in numbers.